one of the hardest things to figure out how to deal with is the absence of problems. Because I spent most of my life struggling with different things. And I'm by no means unique in the sense that everyone has something that they're going through. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I'm special in any way. I'm just saying that throughout most of my life, I was struggling with something. I had my mother who was mentally disabled and living with me, so that was kind of like a weird skeleton in the closet kind of a thing going on, where it just felt like I couldn't move on with my life because I was busy trying to sort of navigate living someone else's life. And then I was in a marriage that was ultimately nice in some ways and also really toxic in other ways. And that was this sort of a paradoxical feeling of I'm supposed to be happy and life's supposed to be good, but it feels like it's kind of awful too, in a way. And there was that sense of just something not quite, legitimate, I guess, about the entire situation. I've had, financial problems, times when money was just not going well and I was broke, or I was in debt, or I had made some kind of bad decision, which I was then paying the price for as time went on. And without elaborating too much, the point I'm getting at is that we spend our lives trying to figure out, how do you pay the bills? How do you solve that problem? How do you get out of that thing that you got yourself into, right? And then even excluding our personal stuff, we get focused on other things which we think are important, big ticket issues in our life, like what's going on in a political election or something like that. The world is messed up. We need to fix it. But if you let go of all that stuff and you solve your own personal problems, you right-side your life, you get out from under bad relationships and bad influences and lies and all of that, you solve these problems, you work through the incongruities and the lies you've told yourself and the conflicts that you have inside, then you get to the point where you're kind of just sort of neutral, right? You've eliminated the bad things, but you haven't necessarily replaced those things with something healthy. And maybe you're just kind of letting the fields rest, right? Like you go through some rough times, bad times, hard experiences, and then at some point maybe you just kind of take a break, right? It's like climbing out of a pit. You get to the top and then you're not so much focused on moving forward as you're just relieved that you're not in the hole anymore. But then along with that, there is this sense that you're supposed to be doing something. Sometimes it's hard to know what to do with the silence which is brought about by peace. Because we spend so much time trying to navigate problems. We make that the actual purpose of life. We spend our entire day complaining about people and things which we perceive to be standing between us and the opportunity to be happy and successful. We make that our ethos, to fight the fight before us. So when there isn't any fight anymore, then comes the realization that we've got to learn to let enough be enough. We've got to become comfortable with just being ourselves. And then there's other things we can potentially do, which are healthy activities to replace the toxic ones which we have left behind. And at a certain point, that becomes the imperative, that we have to figure out how to make the most of our lives in a post problem era. I would compare this to taking off in an airplane. You take off in the airplane, you begin your flight, doing safety checks, walking off the aircraft, doing all the different things that you have to do to get clearance to take off, to get off the ground, to climb to altitude. But then there's a point where you have to reach altitude. You can't be in a state of ascent forever. At some point, you have to level off. If you think you're going to keep on climbing for the entire duration of your flight, well, you don't understand how to fly. Because the point is to get above the obstacles and then level off and then maintain that flight level for the remainder of your journey until it's time to begin descent again. So I think it's important to understand that it's that way in life too. We need to get to a point where we're okay. We need to get to a point where the problems are below us and behind us. Because if you live your whole life in a perpetual state of crisis, always trying to fight through some kind of a problem, always trying to battle some sort of an inner conflict, well, you never really live, because that's not the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to work hard to overcome any problems you may have, and then spend a majority of your life in a state of harmony and peace. The battle should be the exception to the rule. And then when you have to fight, then you give it all you've got. You step up to the plate, you take the challenge, but you win, and then you go back to a place of harmony, peace, and rest. That's how it should be. But for many of us, we tend to just live in a state of crisis, jumping from one disaster to the next, one crisis, one problem to another. And it's hard to know what to do with your time when you don't have that going on. It's like if you always gossip about people, you go to work, you gossip about people. That's what you do. That's how you spend your time. Then you decide, okay, I'm not going to talk poorly about people. I'm going to stop gossiping. And then suddenly you realize you don't have anything to say anymore, because the crazy thing is you didn't even have a personality. If you take out the negativity, you take out the slander, you take out the venting about things and all of those things that you would normally base your conversations on, which were negative. You take all that stuff out and you don't really have anything to say. It doesn't mean you couldn't have something to say. It's just you have to retrain yourself to think about things through the lens of, how can I spend my time doing something that is positive, something that's aspirational, something that encourages me and encourages others, instead of focusing on things which are wrong. And I think you really have to just begin. That's the bottom line of it. Like I'll always remember a video that Asmongold made, and he said, in reference to making videos, he said, you have to turn the camera on. That's how you become successful. And it's so true. Like, you can talk about what video editor you use, you can talk about what content you put out, you can talk about timing or method or marketing or any number of different things, but the reality is, you know why most people fail? It's not because they couldn't put out good content. It's not because they don't have anything to say. It's not because they couldn't figure it out or do something with themselves. It's because they never actually begin. I think about this because sometimes it's hard for me to find the discipline to want to make a video. Sometimes it's hard for me to find the discipline to do other things I enjoy. Like writing or working on a book that I want to publish one day. And it's really easy for me to say something like, well, I'm not good at writing. Well, I am pretty good at writing, actually. What I'm not good at is practicing discipline to take all of those hundreds of pages of notes and turn them into something that I could actually publish. And so how do you get good? Well, it's not about finding the perfect word processor or the perfect note app or anything like that. It's about actually beginning, actually saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it now. I'm going to put that on the front of my list of priorities, and I'm going to keep at it until I start to get some traction. If you're giving up being negative, if you're giving up a life that's based off of toxic things and problems so that you can focus on things which are inspirational and positive in your life, then at some point you have to power through that time of silence when nothing really seems like it's clicking. It's like when you think, well, I don't want to exercise, but if you actually get up off the couch, the exercising isn't actually so bad. Or the alarm clock goes off in the morning and you think, well, I don't want to get out of bed. But if you get out of bed, then suddenly you realize after that first cup of coffee that getting out of bed wasn't so bad after all. You have to begin. You have to power through that initial fog. But subconsciously we think that the fog goes on forever. And so when you're groggy and you're half asleep and the alarm is going off, you think to yourself, my goodness, if I'm going to feel this tired all day long, I don't want to get out of bed. That's terrible. But not really. You just have to finish waking up. That's all it really is. And it's the same thing with your attitude. It's the same thing with the sorts of things that you introduce into your daily life, your routines, the things that you say, the things that you do. Once you begin to practice, once you begin to do the things that you need to do, even if you do them poorly, you will begin to develop that muscle, and the thoughts will start to flow better, and the results will start to get better if you have the courage to begin. I think that a lot of us don't even get to the point where we have the luxury of saying, you know, life is good. I've gotten through a lot of my obstacles and problems, and now I just have to figure out how I can make the most productive use of the time and the life I have. A lot of us don't even get there because a lot of us never actually get through the overcoming the problems phase. A lot of us never even get the airplane to altitude. So we never get to have that conversation of, well, let's level off and just maintain the current flight level, because a lot of people, you know, you can't talk about how much you're going to invest and where you're going to invest it when you never even got to the point where you paid off your credit card. But if you do get there, then you have to understand that getting to altitude is not the end of the journey. Being straight and level and being a good steward of the time you have for the remainder of your journey, that's the next thing you have to work on. And if you were looking for something exciting to do as a pilot, taking off is probably one of the more exciting things you can do. Taking off is interesting. But when you get to altitude, you don't really see very much out the window. The ground is far away. The buildings are small. The scenery is less interesting when you're far up in the sky. So being at altitude, despite being the longest part of the journey, is probably also the most boring part of the journey. That's the time when a pilot might wind up taking a nap while the plane is on autopilot being monitored by the co-pilot, because there's not really that much to do. That doesn't mean that it's not important. It's just different. Then, of course, there will come a time when you have to focus on the descent. And maybe that's uncomfortable to talk about because we don't like to think about the reality that no matter who you are, no matter how well you plan your journey, there will come a time when you have to start planning for the journey to end. But if you understand the purpose of what you're doing, then you'll also understand that planning for the end of the journey and graciously piloting the aircraft back to the ground is also an important and vital part of the experience. It's perhaps the most important part of the experience because it's the part which determines whether the people and the things in your stewardship and care survive so that they can be part of the future and not be lost along the way. Life is a journey which is filled with battles to fight when we're young, consistency to practice in our middle age, and hopefully an inheritance to leave for others when it's our time to call it a day. And every one of those seasons comes with its own unique benefits, its own unique opportunities, its own unique difficulties. And none of us are assured a long life that ends with old age. So I'm not really talking just about how old you are. I'm talking about the life stage. Because really, at all times, and they'll teach people this in flight school, whether you're taking off, whether you're at altitude, or whether you're beginning the landing phase of the journey, you should always have a plan for how you're going to land the plane safely if something goes wrong. Now, some of that might be estate planning. I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about the mindset of living your life every day as if it were your last, with the knowledge that one day it surely will be. Learn to be a good steward of the time that you have. And realize that sometimes good stewardship isn't about fireworks. It's just about basic faithfulness, basic mindfulness, being true to yourself and not forsaking the things which you have begun. Maybe it's keeping a journal. Maybe it's writing that book. Maybe it's making YouTube videos. Maybe it's finishing the main story quest in your favorite video game. Maybe it's listening to someone who needs to share something with a friend. Whatever it is. I think in a world filled with messaging that we should try to be extraordinary, it's important to remember that good character, consistency, integrity, being someone who can be trusted, those are things which count for a great deal. When we tally up whether we had a good life or a bad one, whether we contributed value into the world or whether we took more than we gave. It's like the parable of the talents. Sometimes we think we aren't given very much to be a good steward of, so why does it really matter what we do? And yet the truth is, it's not about how much you produce. It's about doing something good with the things that you have. Wherever you find yourself, try to do something good with the time you have, something good with the life you have. Try to work through your problems so that you can move into a time of stewardship, of blessings, instead of living in a state of continual struggle against evils. And finally, remember that at the end of the day, at the end of your life, you won't be taking any of it with you anyway. So be honest, be courageous, and live each day in a way that you would be proud of if it was your last. Good luck on your adventure, as always. Thanks for watching.